Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Laurie Tompkins. Laurie is a UK composer and performer and co-founder of the label Slip. In fact, Laurie and I first connected probably about 10 years ago now at the Slip launch event at V22 in London. We've been in sporadic touch since. He played a gig with Dave Bainbridge at my flat, in fact, in about 2014, 2015. And I'm delighted to see that Laurie has released 3 albums this spring. One with Hyperdelia, one with On Tract, and one with 3333. And they all have some structure to them. There's also a lot of what feels like improvisation and free play. And what I love is often throughout these releases, you get this sense of embracing the instinct before it's been fully formed into something lovely and shapely, like language. You know, there's moments where, well, I do this anyway, you might walk into a shop and say something that is basically 2 words at the same time and it comes out like a bit of a mess. This music often feels like embracing that moment and championing it and running with it. There's these rough edges, these ungainly gestures which are delivered with such force and fervour that you just believe them. I love these records. They work really well as a trio, as Laurie and I discuss. Thoroughly recommend checking them out. So you can head over to attentionmagazine.co.uk for all the links. They'll also be in the show notes. And feel free to donate to the podcast if you're able on Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/crucial listening. Again, link in the show notes. You can do that one-off or as a monthly thing, whatever amount suits you best. Otherwise, please enjoy. This is Laurie Tompkins on Crucial Listening. Hello, Laurie. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hey, Jack. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're here to talk about your 3 important albums. Before we get stuck into those, I want to talk about your 3 albums. So, over the spring, you've released 3 records. One with Eliza McCarthy, called Years Went By, and then 2 under your own name. So, Sharp Love, Slow Faint, and Fatty. So, how have you ended up releasing 3 records in such quick succession? And it's hard, given that they're in such close proximity, not to think of them being by some means connected, at least from this end, but I'm wondering if you see them that way. So
Yeah, I think they're all connected. I kind of almost see them as one thing. It wasn't necessarily a deliberate plan to wait for all of them to come out at once kind of thing. It just ended up that way. But basically, the first one that came out, the piano record with Eliza McCarthy, was started way in 2019 or something. And the idea for that was that it would be piano, these quite kind of dense piano pieces with a live acoustic piano and then electronic backings, and they would all kind of be synced up and stuff. And then when the pandemic came, we ended up doing doing it as a recorded project essentially. And I think in terms of the human ability to play it, it would basically be impossible to play live. So it kind of ended up being the score was some idealized version of a performance, which I then kind of produced. And yeah, so there's actually the fifth track on that album kind of reappears in a different version on Fatty. And it's called Dreams on Fatty, and on Years Went By it's called These Dreams Make My Heart Hurt, and one's kind of like an electric piano version and one's a acoustic piano version. So there's like some stuff like that where there's like quite clear musical links, but basically Years Went By was like extremely dense, very active music, and across the 3 records I kind of was like giving myself a bit more permission to like relax, basically.
Right.
So like a lot of the Sharp Love Slow Faint, which is with Eliza and Ashley, the kind of idea for that one was that when I was recording with Eliza, there would be these bars that take like 5 seconds or something, and because we'd be recording them, they go kind of round and round, and we'd hear them for like a minute and then take like the best version of that 5 seconds that I'd pieced together in the recording. But then at the end of the day, we were like, actually, you could listen to that for like 3 minutes or something.
Right.
So in a way, it's like Sharp Love Slow Faint is like I went back to the piano music and then just like let like certain bits that I like of it breathe a lot more, and just like added some new bits and kind of sung over the top. So there was that, and then Fatty was much more like it was like a guests album more. So like getting friends to like either send me a backing, or I would do a backing and they'd do a vocal over the top. In the case of like Will from Yeah You, for example. And then, yeah, they were all pieced together kind of as tracks with like little features by different people, all recorded remotely, sort of thing.
Nice.
So yeah, there's certain, they all kind of bleed into one, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But they're not like a kind of linked, like 3-part mega work sort of thing. They're just
right.
yeah, they kind of sort of reflect one another, and they were all written at the same time.
Talk to me about being a vocalist. Right? So I might be really wrong on this, but I think when we initially connected, this is like 10 years ago now, the voice, I certainly wasn't aware of the voice being a part of your practice. So it's really startling and lovely to hear your voice now so pronounced within the music and so strong. So
yeah.
What's that trajectory been like of, I guess, becoming someone who uses the voice now very prominently?
I guess the kind of trajectory has been that I started using it maybe 6 years ago or something, in like extremely primitive ways, like shouting or like writing pieces for ensembles where people would like be like using their voice quite aggressively alongside playing and stuff. Just because for me it kind of gives like not only like a physical presence to something, it's like obviously the voice is like a very personal thing, so it's kind of it's sort of a way of like me being a composer who like writes notes for other people and stuff, but also like standing up to be counted in the music myself a bit.
Nice,
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I always kind of feel like, you know, there's like a vulnerability to it in some ways. And then the more I've kind of done it, the more like I really enjoy it. And it's now kind of come full circle that basically when I've been doing shows this year, the show has been like a kind of electronic backing track. It's basically a karaoke set. So
yes.
Yeah, you just have a backing track which is like a collage of loads of the instrumentals from all 3 records, and then I just sing like constantly over the top, and it's like just me on the mic the whole time. And I actually, it sounds kind of preposterous, but yeah, I ended up enjoying it loads, and like I feel quite comfortable doing it now. So I mean I sung at school and stuff, but that was like just, you know, choral music or just quite traditional stuff. So yeah, I like it, and I think I think sometimes for me also coming up with like material and melodies, like just like coming up with something improvised is like a nice way of being a bit more free of like coming up with stuff on a stave on a piano, you know what I mean? Which is like music college kind of hang-ups and stuff.
Yes.
It's quite nice, just that freedom to be like, this sounds good on the voice, so it's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a description in the text for Sharp Love Slow Faint, which I'm guessing you wrote, right? But it describes you as a hyperreal crooning entertainer, which is a delicious phrase. Can you tell me about the appeal of being a crooner? That feels like a very specific choice of word.
Yeah, well, I guess I thought of Sharp Love Slow Faint as almost like a smooth jazz like archetype there. So it's like almost like a bit of a genre play in that record. But also that's kind of how I like to sing. Like I quite like the thing about crooning, right, is that it's like you have it's kind of registers as traditional singing in some ways. It's like you kind of lean into it, you sing quite fully. It's like big vib, and it's it's got a lot of like physical presence to it. I don't really think of myself as like a crooner in terms of like melancholy, like last guy in the bar kind of thing. But I like that. I do like that idea of like someone singing to themselves almost, like the kind of that tone you get when you're like, I think all of Sharp Love Slow Faint is like the other two parts were recorded at Cafe Otto, the duo, like with Eliza and Ashley, and then all the vocals were separate, me at home. So they're like much more like sung to myself and then kind of treated or made strange somehow. They're not really trying to deliver some kind of text as like a message or something. They're kind of someone like playing with stuff in their own kind of comfortable like domestic space, I guess. I didn't, so the crooner thing was just from the label, but I did approve it, so yeah.
Nice. Great. Well, they're awesome. I've been listening to these records a lot, which
thanks.
Today it's been intense, but I think they're really fabulous. I'm going to put links in the show notes, so people please
thank you.
Check them out. So Laurie, let's talk about your 3 important records. So
yeah, sure.
First thing I'd like to ask is about how you thought about the word important when coming up with your list. I mean, was there a way that you understood that word in order to come up with the 3 records that you did?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite instinctive after a while. I tried not to have too obvious rules, but just to think of things that I've listened to regularly over like a reasonable amount of time, but also like a probably reflective of, what I wish I could do best, right. If that makes sense. They're kind of like things that I always come back to because I feel like in some ways they've influenced me a lot, but they're also like sort of out of reach in some ways. If that makes sense. So yeah, they're important in that way, and they're also, I think they've been important to me during the writing of these records as well, not like just living with them. One of those things where like I listen to them all the time, and then you've made something new, you do another show and you come back to them and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of maybe that's, I've nicked that as well off of this record, or like kind of like the 3 I've put out, they all bleed into one another, and they're stuff that I would always just like not think twice about putting on.
Okay, cool. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Why don't we talk about Blue Jean Tyranny, because I've got that in front of me as well.
Sure, yeah. Okay, great. So this is Out of the Blue. Give me a little introduction then as to why this one's important to you.
So I think I came across this couple of years ago, and I mean, I kind of know him as the keyboard player in Perfect Lives by Robert Ashley.
Right.
So he was really involved with all the Mills College stuff around the Bay in like the late 70s. But it's just like a very, very inimitable and quite pure record, I think. It's like all the lines are really clean. It like sounds huge and amazing, but it's not self-consciously sort of weird or kind of freaky, I don't think. It's like very melodic, but it's like also incredibly hard to pin down or think of anything that's particularly like it, to me. And obviously, you know, him as a sort of composer coming out of like a music college environment, but then like writing for instrumentalists in a more kind of song idiom seemed to make sense, particularly with the Sharp Love Slow Faint record. Yeah, I don't know. How did it come across to you? Yeah, it's a weird one.
It is weird because it's only 4 tracks, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like each one is an unpicking of what I think I'm getting myself into.
Yeah, that's true.
So you kind of start with, I listened a couple of times. My vague memories is something that had slight, almost like a Joni Mitchell thing going on at points in the first track.
Totally.
And then second track was like a Herbie Hancock thing.
Yeah.
And then the third track, I don't even know. You know, you had those harmonies coming in, and then the fourth, you're like, oh, blimey, okay, now we're sprawling out into 25 minutes of, you know, text and field recording and bits of everything that's come prior, but also none of them. So
Yeah.
it's one of those where it's almost like an unclosed loop where I'm like, almost, I think the little kid who grew up on very coherent albums is looking for something to make them meld in a way that feels, you know, narratively satisfying, but then it doesn't need that really. If you go back in again, I was like, okay, no, this is I need to come to this.
Yeah, it's kind of like 4 pieces more, I guess, and that last one, A Letter from Home, is like, has all of this kind of, it's like a big letter, isn't it? I think one of the things he's so good at is like everything is super detailed, but then you get these weird moments. It's like you said about the Herbie Hancock thing, or like like the actual material, some of it is like so just like straight up, it feels like almost unfiltered, like some of the texts, or like you have this like pull of like something highly organized and deliberate that also has this space for just like very casual things in it as well, which I really like, that thing of like you can't tell like what kind of logic is holding those two things together beyond like someone just being amazing.
Absolutely, that's it.
Yeah, it's like totally personal music, and I think one of the things that, because I'm not really that good with like traditional harmony or something, and obviously he was like a jazz pianist, and like a lot of these things are like just sequences of chords and whatnot, but I think he has really nice like cycles of chords and stuff that just go round and round in like very sweet, satisfying ways. And when I was doing the Sharp Love Slow Faint stuff, it was like making pieces where we each had these tiny postcards of loops that would go round and round and kind of slightly change, but that idea of like quite a satisfying loop that doesn't necessarily sync exactly in with other loops, but they all kind of have their like their right length and they have their right amount of space and all that sort of stuff, was like, yeah, I find it really satisfying. And also I guess because like loads of these pieces have like acoustic stuff, but then like a big like quite brazen electronic keys sound, which is like a huge part of like those records that I was making as well. It's just like smooth E keys, you know.
Yeah. Maybe that's addressed the question I was going to ask then, which was when you talked about why these records were important, you mentioned that they all do something that maybe you're kind of clasping for as well. Is that it? What does it look like with this Blue Jean Tyranny record?
You mean stuff that I do as well, or stuff that I would like to do?
Yeah, well, whichever one feels appropriate, I guess. I mean, it's when you mentioned that the fact they were important. I think you said that they do something that you can't. I'm wondering what is that with Blue Jean Tyranny? What's the part of this record that's maybe out of reach to you, or you're like, oh, you know, I want to be doing some of that.
I mean, I think with writing text and stuff, that's a huge... I don't really see myself as like a writer at all. So like one of the nice parts about doing records and stuff recently was like feeling like I can make words that I can sing
right.
as part of music, and then you like look up and you're like, I guess that's text. But I think he kind of does that amazingly, like in this like big letter thing, which just feels like he's kind of riffing for 20 minutes. It's like an amazing piece of text, and it also feels like someone who is like a composer who's like just like trying, just like goofing around with some text. So I think that's like hugely liberating to like see that, you know. So like in terms of stuff that I think when I said about stuff they can do that I can't, it's more like the level of refinement, or like it's more like a quality thing than than a type thing, if that makes sense. So like I love all like these big vocal harmonies and stuff, and that's something I really want to lean more into. And yeah, just these moments on this record where it's like a sudden like chorus of like 3 or 4 voices doing these like beautiful harmonies through like some weird tape effect or something. It's like it's just, you know, you could listen to that bit of music and then be like, okay, like just try and write yourself in that headspace, and it would be something probably completely different, but it's just so like generative. There's so many ideas in it, and it's so just like joyful and free. I think, yeah, like it makes me feel very free to write, and just like free as a listener as well.
Lovely. I mean, speaking of the vocal harmonies, I wanted to bring up as well the fact that you've got Ashley Paul doing harmonies on Sharp Low Slow Faint. So I know you mentioned that the instruments were done in Cafe Otto, and then you took the vocals home. Did Ashley then add the harmonies after that? How did that bit work?
We did some of those duo vocals together actually in Otto. That's like probably the one exception to that rule. Yeah, I mean, that was really fun, because like I've never really written for Ashley before, and Ashley and Eliza hadn't played together before as well, so yeah, it was pretty nice singing with her. She's great.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I guess, you know, there's a difference between you doing the crooner thing kind of strictly as a crooner, and then kind of locking in or integrating with someone else. What was that as a vocalist to, you know, work alongside Ashley like that?
It's comfortable, to be honest. I mean, we kind of, in those ones, we both have like little loops, and we have kind of multiple words that we can say on each note, so it's quite like playful. You're kind of going around a loop together, but you're almost like landing together and not quite together, you know. There's this sense of like speeding up, slowing down, everything, time sort of dilating and kind of sludging a lot of the time in the music. So like Ashley's really, I've got that quality seeing Ashley play a lot, you know, and putting out her music and stuff. So I thought that she would be into that, and there's only a few moments of it in the record together, but like, yeah, it's really nice. Also because like, I think Ashley's voice, like, I mean this in a very complimentary way, by the way, but it's like quite sharp tone. A lot of the time, like it really cuts through, and like then if you have me like doing the more croony, like wobbly, sort of fluffy kind of thing,
Yeah.
it's quite hard to match them tone wise, and so it kind of, I kind of like that slight built-in awkwardness or something. I kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, I build a lot of towers that fall over with my toddler, and it feels like one of those. Where you're just
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's never gonna hold.
Yeah, but that's kind of the fun of it, because
Yeah.
you know that something's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So on Blue Jean Tyranny, I mean, have you stuck with this record? I don't know how many Blue Jean Tyranny has put out solo, but is there anything else that this has led you into on the back of hearing this?
I mean, the one that is absolutely mind-blowing, and I still don't really completely know my way around. I mean, he died, I think, either last year or like earlier this year, but there was like a 7 CD box set that came out on Unseen Worlds called Degrees of Freedom, which is like 50 years of work, which includes some versions of these pieces that were done in concerts with, like, you know, for instance, I think it's maybe Leading a Double Life. There's a version of it with like a men's choir somewhere, and it's just like, you know, completely bonkers 7 CDs of music.
Wow.
Yeah, so that, and then I'm a big Robert Ashley fan and stuff, but I feel like a lot of people know about Robert Ashley and maybe slightly less about Blue Jean, and I think that something which I really appreciate about this is like the cleanness of it and the kind of sort of block by blockness of the music, which is a bit different in Robert Ashley. It's a bit more like mysterious, a bit more kind of fading at the edges. Yeah, and I relate more to that kind of blocky sort of thing myself, I think. So, yeah, it's good.
It's good, it is good.
How close can you get? Ghosts appear mostly in February. How do you describe something which is invisible and unknowable? When the train goes by, what should I pay attention to? The sound, or what I see, or what goes on in my mind, or maybe all 3 of them at once? 3 guesses: a coincidence, a connection outside, a connection inside. It's so beautiful to see someone thinking. Consider 4 billion people walking around with slightly different things in their heads at any given moment.
Laurie, let's go to your second important record. Which one do you want to go for now?
Can we go to Improved Sound Limited?
You can. So, Road Tracks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, give me a little introduction as to why this one's important to you.
Well, this is like, I guess I've been into this since I left college, like 2013 or something. And what I find kind of interesting about it is like they're a German band who are like doing this kind of quite, it's almost like forced version of like Americana.
Yeah.
So the first like 5 tracks on it are like from Kings of the Road, the Wim Wenders film, which I saw when I was like studying German before going to Berlin. And that was like that's like a film that really stayed with me. And yeah, I don't know, like the sax playing, I thought had like a huge is like a massively linked to like what I was trying to do in that trio with these like huge kind of almost in bad tastes, like huge sax lines.
Yeah.
And that track 9 Feet Over the Tarmac, where it's like the instrumental and then it comes back with the vocal. The lyrics are kind of, they're like quite terrible in a way, but I think there's almost like there's quite like a genuine spirit about it. And I think one of the things that I actually quite like in music is where there's like a sense of like authenticity and genuine spirit to it, but the means through which it is doing it are not obvious.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's like this kind of sense with Wim Wenders in that film and this band that they're like kids in rural Germany, like wishing they were like on the open road in the States or something, and making this kind of like dreamy music as if they were there, but like it's also like it failing to be authentically that is kind of better in some ways for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, did you like it? I mean, it's like it's a bit of a head scratcher, this one, I think.
Well, do you listen to it like a record from start to finish?
No, and that's also kind of... But I think that was quite important to me, because I wanted to put something in here that was like a bit like that, because I listened to loads of soundtracks, and I quite like the awkwardness of like track orders sometimes, where like, for instance, if you get like a soundtrack CD, I've like Taxi Driver here or whatever on the left of me, and they don't really function as albums, but that's kind of what's quite fun about them.
Yes.
Like you get repetitions of the same theme like every 3 tracks, and like a slightly different scoring or something.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you're sitting listening at home, you're like, does this work as an album or not? and that's actually kind of quite cool, because then if you're thinking about making an album along the lines of a soundtrack, you could just repeat the same 4 times, like spaced out over it. But yeah, I wanted a soundtrack in here basically, because I think like just, you know, I'm sure when you listen to those records that I made, you won't think of like film soundtracks necessarily, but I quite like something that has like a very immediate mood or like sound to it. And often I have like quite, even if they're really basic, I have quite like strong like images in my mind for each bit of a piece or an album. So yeah, just that kind of logic of like no introductions, no like just cut to the chase. It needs to be like the biggest possible version of itself immediately.
Yeah.
Is quite appealing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I listened to it as a record. I think the first time I put it on, I hadn't read any context. I'd literally just put it on, and then it starts with that instrumental, and I think it starts with 2 instrumentals that are labelled instrumental. I was like,
right.
Boys, what are you doing? Like, we're starting with two instrumental numbers. Okay. And then the first song comes back again with a vocal version. At that point, I thought something's afoot.
Yeah.
So who does that? But well, the thing I find is, so it's from 3 films, right? The tracks. So I understand that you have these silos of, you know, is that right? You have like the first batch of tracks is from one film, then the next, then the next. Is that how it's structured?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, that limits the separation you can have between the instrumental version and the vocal version. But they don't even put them at polar ends of the records. Like within 2 minutes, you're hearing the same track, and then the vocal version, which is like, feels like structurally a kind of faux pas.
It's so wrong, it's right.
yeah, exactly. But then, actually, that I think was a real key part of me seeing this listening experience as something definitely more than its parts, in the sense that, as you say, it's got this very quintessentially kind of cliched Americana vibe, but in the structure of these strange vignettes and these repetitions and sort of half versions of things you've already heard, the sort of road nature of it, the sort of the that locomotive nature of like sort of being stranded in it, felt very apparent because of how it was structured. And maybe had it been put in a tidy package, it might have been a lesser of an experience.
Do you feel, apart from like the repetition of tracks, I think one thing that's like quite interesting as well is that the sound is really consistent across all of them, right? It's like all these slide guitars, like huge sax, occasional other bits, and it's like it's quite stripped down, really. So I think it also kind of works as one long flow.
Yeah.
Like almost like one ensemble setup, and then like you have these little repetitions at the start. It's like almost like 3 acts of one piece. and they were all written within 3 years of each other. You know, like the first two films were both out in 76, I think, and the last one in 79. So it's like, it's almost like a portrait of like a little period of an approach for like, you know, a couple of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all of the vocal stuff is just so unbelievably incredible.
What
I also
is
think
9 feet over the tarmac? I'm trying to figure out what I was in my car trying to figure out what that referred to. Is that the length of a vehicle on the tarmac?
No, it's like, I think it's like the height of like a truck. You know, it's got like a bit of raise. So it's like in Kings of the Road, it's like these two guys that are driving like this big kind of almost like a lorry that's kind of kitted out to camp around rural Germany, and they don't do that much. They just sort of stop in various places and have profound experiences, you know.
Sure.
But yeah, 9 feet over the tarmac is like the ode to the like the rig, as he calls it, riding around in my rig. Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of, it's like these horrible rhyming couplets. It's kind of like done with like a German English sort of delivery, isn't it, as well? So it's like there's these sort of layers of stuff that like somehow should make it not work, but I think partly the function of me listening to it like years and years all the time is like I wouldn't want it any other way. I wouldn't want it better at this point. So I kind of, I don't know, all of that stuff I think is stuff I like and must kind of feed into the way I feel about stuff, especially because I've always felt somewhat like inauthentic, or like I've liked to make music in a way that like is not really about myself, but is nonetheless like quite personal somehow, or feels like, yeah, like owned somehow.
So you said you discovered this one when you came out of college. So was that through the film?
Yeah, it was. And you know, actually, when I did that tour and you put me on in Bournemouth with Dave Bainbridge,
Yes.
that was hugely inspired by this, all the banjo stuff.
Right.
And the idea of like a kind of like two guys on the road playing some slide guitar, but in a sort of very ritualized fashion, is like, does kind of go, that was like a crude kind of you know, ode to this in its own way. But I think this, just the sax playing and stuff, I've always loved on this. I love just like those huge sax melodies where it's like you're not edging in with like some breathy stuff and like some multiphonics. It's just like, give it to us big. Yeah,
it's a lot.
I like it.
What about the track, and maybe it's 2 from the end, which has that spoken monologue about life?
Yeah.
What do you make of that
deep.
one?
Life is a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, gorgeous.
I actually love it. I mean, like, I think that kind of response to stuff where you're like, I really feel this quite deeply, but also like it's so kind of manufactured somehow, or like not manufactured, but yeah, like almost like ritualistic, or like,
Yes.
yeah, like I find that kind of wrong/right kind of combo like really, really appealing, and like quite an interesting proposition to write into a lot of the time. Like, what if you combine this with this or whatever? Like, that shouldn't work, so I'm gonna write the version where it might in my own way, kind of thing. But yeah, like, life is an unfinished composition.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna get I haven't got the tattoo, you know, but it's like it's quite beautiful in its own way.
Yeah. I just think I'm fascinated by there's an earnest conviction to how it's said,
Yes,
which I
exactly.
really admire. I'm like, kind of yearn for that. There's something
Yeah.
very nice about it.
I also think I'm quite like a sucker for like old soundtracks where there's like quite big themes, and like the text and all this stuff is like, it does feel like a different era of like soundtrack kind of approach, which is much more now about like sort of textural. One's not better than the other, you know, but nowadays it's much more about giving space to the action and like small kind of textural, probably drone bass sort of things or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is like the complete opposite. It's like, and now like there's only going to be a picture of someone like driving down a road because we need like this space for all the information of someone doing their like music monologue.
Yeah.
I like that about it as well.
You say you listen to a lot of soundtracks. Were there any others that were in the mix for picking as one of your important records, or was it always going to be this one?
Soundtrack wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably always going to be this one, although like I have a huge like John Carpenter I've had a huge John Carpenter moment like the last 6 months, and
Nice.
I love like Taxi Driver as well. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Carpenter, I feel like I'm more interested in talking about this because it's like not, it seems to have some of the genre stuff which I really like about John Carpenter and like horror, but it's kind of lighter, and in a way it's like, to my mind, it's a harder thing to do, to try and make something that's like quite heartfelt in a similarly kind of genre fashion.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And also as well, I think to bring so much of yourselves as people into this kind of music, this earnest kind of humanity to it, when it's not about you as soundtrack composers.
Yeah, exactly.
So much easier to kind of, you know, hide behind the synths.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, they both have that.
Sax.
Yeah, they both have that thing of just like the huge, you know, stripping stuff back essentially to themes.
Yes.
Which I think is quite, doesn't necessarily have to be like a conservative kind of, you know, the right notes or whatever. The idea of like the iconic theme, but like it's like quite a cool, I don't know, I've always found that quite like a productive thing. Like just go and make like a big fat riff, whatever that is.
If we were to play a little clip of one of the tracks here, do you have one that juts out as a personal favourite?
I mean, you should probably play 9 Feet Over the Tarmac with the vocal for
So.
either that or Suicide Road with the sax. I would go for.
Nice. Okay. And just to lock in the full potential of this, when you think back to discovering or first listening to this, what kind of memories are coming to your head as listening experiences? Like, where are you? How are you listening to this?
It was just before moving to Berlin, so I was at home in Wanstead for like 3 months. I feel like listening to this was like a huge changing moment for me in terms of allowing myself to feel like this could be as like worthy an influence to kind of talk about in a situation like this as like you know, Stravinsky, whatever.
Right.
So there's a huge sense of genuine freedom attached to it for me, and obviously there's like themes of freedom and stuff in the movies and all of that. But I just a huge sense of like, I'm watching these German films, like gonna move to Germany soon and all of that, and kind of be also not having to answer to the institution anymore.
Right.
I think, honestly, like, that might sound a bit exaggerated, like, musically, but I think of it just as like a really, it's like a really treasured thing for me, this one.
I know every square inch of the cat I call my home. My ring, she's mighty pretty. Don't need no shiny chrome.
Laurie, we've got one more album. What is your
Yes.
final important record?
It's Blue Alibi by Mika Levy.
Yeah. So again,
Yeah.
give me a little introduction as to why this one is important to you.
Well, this one I think it came out in 2021 in January, and I think of it as probably like the contemporary record that I most kind of live with, writing these pieces that came out of mine. And also just like Mika's music as a whole has been like hugely influential to me, as it has to loads of other people and whatever, but I wanted to have something of Mika's, and I felt like this is a really odd record, I think. And I kind of listened to it when it came out, and taking walks when, you know, you could only sort of go on your little bit of exercise a day in lockdown and all this sort of stuff. So I have quite an intense relationship just because of you know, that time in lockdown stuff. And I think the music also sounds like something that was made during lockdown, and making the most of those possibilities of like remote takes from different people and kind of quite brutal sort of editing methods and stuff. Like, it's really kind of, it feels like someone is just shoving like different layers into something and then just like tearing one off really abruptly, you know.
Yeah.
There's like, it's very, very odd and bold, and yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one came out like a month after another album, Rough Dog, that Mika put out. Was that one that you connected with as well? And if so, why was it that Blue Alibi was the one that made the list rather than that one?
I really like Rough Dog. I think it's much more consistent, and it's more, you know, it's more guitars, and it's more like shoegaze guitars.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is like, it has the kind of these kind of chorusy arpeggiated guitar stuff, but it's quite skeletal. And I think the form of it as an album is really, to me, quite enticing, because it's quite short, and then it has these two like just like massive tracks in the middle that are, you know, massive in the context, like 4 or 5 minutes, that are like, you're like, what's going on? It's like
yeah,
completely like just when you'd expect like it to be kind of settling into a zone, it just like rips everything out. And then kind of brings you back in towards the end. Yeah, I think Rough Dog to me was like a lot more kind of conventionally solid. So I thought the variety of this one maybe spoke more to me personally.
Yeah.
And what I kind of like to do.
So obviously you've been in touch with or connected to Mika's music for a while now. How did you first get acquainted with it?
Just at college. So I don't know Mika that well, but obviously we've worked together on the record label and stuff the odd time. But yeah, like I heard the first Shapes album at college, and then I actually went to see Chopped and Screwed at the South Bank. I don't know if you know that record, the Rough Trade record, but that's amazing. And that was in like 2012, and I went to see that because Ollie Coates was playing in it at the South Bank and stuff. And so yeah, I don't know, I think of them as just like, I really love everything they've sort of ever put out, really. And not really because I think of my music necessarily as like super similar or anything, but I think just the feeling that it's like possible to make that kind of range of music like with a band, or like, and then producing and then doing like some film score or whatever, and that the feeling that that's kind of can be quite naturally navigated, all of those things, without any of them seeming like a sort of side project or whatever, is really inspiring to me. And yeah, I thought this record was wicked. Also that thing of the way that there's that track Monk in it, which is like feels like it's an outtake from like the Monos like film music stuff.
Right.
And then
right.
there's some stuff with there's like a track with Brother May or like whatever, and there's a track with like the Collective. So I like the idea that it's like an album is like a porous thing that's like each of the tracks feel like they're sort of like a summation of like some other discrete type of work that's then it's almost like a compilation, but like, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That almost feels like, for me, a theme across all these three records is, I think, the way that they structurally hang together feels a little bit fraught. In a way that's quite exciting, because you want to understand why they're sharing company. That's definitely true with this one. I mean, that's the thing with Rough Dog, right? It's like you listen to it and you're like, okay, well, this is a record. As you say,
yes,
it's like really solid. But then Blue Alibi, it's like, okay, well, what are they all doing together?
Yeah, but they also do work.
Yeah.
So it's like there's sort of the irrefutable kind of subconscious evidence that it like works, but it shouldn't.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, that's the dream, really, isn't it? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's the dream. I think it's a wicked record, and I think loads of, particularly like that thing I was talking about, this like really chopped off like editing style, like just like a block of like some weird field recording, you know, that's like taken on a phone and then back to the voice and then cutting someone's guest vocal, like just chopping it out mid-phrase or whatever. Feels like it's done quick and it's done in quite like a free spirit. And that was something that I was really trying to give myself a bit more license to be like, just like, if it feels good when you're doing it, like, then it's good. Like, you don't have to sift it all the time. So I think maybe in the context of lockdown and stuff, that can become like it's almost like not a therapeutic thing, but it gets you back to the essence of like why you make music. It isn't to be clever, it's to, you know, try and get somewhere real, I guess.
Yeah, I think that referring to it as a therapeutic thing is really interesting, because I think, you know, the whole lockdown thing was like a sort of, you know, you could really eat yourself with your thoughts, right, and just kind of mine into stuff forever. And there is definitely a nice idea in counterbalancing that with just, you know, frisbeeing something out there without thinking too much about it. I mean, I find that really interesting, right, because it's something that I feel I'd love to have more confidence in doing, right, but I find that I always find myself going like, well, let's just, you know, sand the edges down a little bit, come on, before that goes out anywhere. I mean, you have on your record, I'm thinking of Sharp Love Slow Faint, there's a really funny end to one of the tracks that it seemed to really tickle me, where you've got that low vocal that ends with like that, which right. I'm like, that's such a bold little, such a protruding little burpy thing at the end, which the more it comes around, the more I love it. How easy do you find doing stuff like that? Is it a reflex where you can do it and be like, that's done, I'm good? Or is there any tension at work where you're like, I need to prune this?
There's a huge, I think it probably helps that like I was basically teaching myself to like try and mix music like at all during doing this. So like particularly with like Sharp Love Slow Faint, it was like so a lot of the vocal stuff was like just, you know, I'd just like record like 40 random vocal skits of like 2 minutes, and then like I would just like grab bits and like pitch them up or whatever, or pitch them down and plonk them over the top of some of the sax and piano stuff and see if it worked. So like some of them were like almost like created very separately and then combined. I think it helped that I didn't necessarily, I'm not like, I don't have that much like technical chops to like fall back on anyway. Particularly like stuff like in this, without like being too technical and boring, like when there's all these notes that are like sort of in the same pitch but not quite.
Yes.
You can get these like horrible distortions and stuff. So whenever I did that, I'd kind of like put all of the vocals and all of the keyboard or something like through this like little orange practice amp I have, or something. Like my mixing solutions were like brutal because I didn't have more artful ones, if that makes sense. So like a lot of the sound of the music is like, okay, like if the sax and the keys are playing, you know, what they sound like in the room, it's going to sound awful as a recording. So like I need to like have some quite brutal effect to make that function.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
so it's like a byproduct of just needing everything to fit.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted them to like sound really like compelling, like just on headphones, you know. Like there are scores for these things and stuff, but it was quite important to me that like it wasn't, you know, you wouldn't sit down and read the score and then compare the recording to it. It's just like here's a record, here's this thing, what do you think?
Yeah.
But yeah, so like there's a lot of sounds that are like through the orange practice amp, or like me just like playing, you know, half of the track like out of my laptop speakers into the room and recording it on a Zoom or something.
Right. Wow. Just
like, yeah, I don't know, to give like a different depth to it or something. But yeah. But yeah, I also like going back to Blue Alibi. I think like there's probably similar-ish things happening in some of those tracks in terms of like recording like a guitar through like a particular pedal in like a room, in like a practice room,
right?
And then someone else sending like a voice note type vocal. So then that kind of shared audio space is pretty weird.
Yes.
And it's quite it does feel like quite, it's obvious to say, but that feels like the sound of what to me like a lot of the pandemic was like these weird colliding of private disconnected spaces.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Audio wise, yeah.
And what I find really striking about that is that Mika's doing something like this, which feels very shoot from the hip, but has the ability to switch into like a massive soundtrack and operate like awesomely in both those molds. I guess we're one where you can't really, I mean, maybe you can use voice notes and stuff in a Hollywood film, but where the edges do have to, for the sake of, you know, a large scale product like a film, need to be refined. And yet, you know, something like Blue Alibi can also be emitted from the same person. I find pretty amazing.
Yeah, and also the fact that that leap doesn't seem forced or like,
no.
I think is really. And then when you think about it musically, it's like all of the music on this is like quite simple lines in some ways, and they're like really memorable melodies, vocals. The texts are like, I think all the lyrics are really great on it.
Yeah.
And like in a way that's kind of why when I was talking about that sort of soundtrack mentality or something earlier, I think that thing of like the primacy of the idea is like something that's kind of what I feel I'm always aiming towards, but like I'm always a bit more muddled and kind of cluttered up than I'd like to be or than some of these records are. But that sense of like, here's my idea, like don't let anything else get in the way of it.
No,
is really that doesn't necessarily mean high production values, low production values, whatever. It just means like trying to understand what the nature of the actual material is, you know.
You've mentioned the fact that this has got a collective on it as well, the Curl Collective, is that right?
Yeah.
So I can't recall exactly who's in that crop of artists, but like Kobe, Say, and
I
think is Tirza in that selection of people
too? I think it's quite free floating, but it's essentially Brother May, Mika and Kobe kind of, if I'm correct, sort of running it, I believe. And they sometimes do like big group pieces. sometimes it might just be like 4 or 5 of them. It's just kind of like a banner name for people that work together and do odd kind of constellations of stuff, and they're all kind of pretty much London based, I think, and
Right.
probably South London based.
Yes.
So yeah, it's kind of like an ensemble almost, you know.
Is there output from the rest of that collective that appeals to you as well? Because it definitely feels like, say for example, Tears are, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Tears is stuff I really like, and obviously Mika is a big presence on those records. I feel like you can really feel a lot of the elements of Tears' records within Blue Alibi, right? You can feel Mika's presence suddenly seems very... What Mika's bringing feels more pronounced when you hear Blue Alibi and then go back to Tears, at least to me anyway.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a more kind of, you know, polished, like pop sort of... I mean, polished is maybe not the right word, but it's like a different environment for that material again, isn't it? It's like a reimagining of that stuff, but it's the same principle of just like strong lines and sounds that are neither like self-consciously like bizarre to like freak you out or like, but equally are not like exactly what you'd expect. They're,
right.
Like always, to go back to the Blue Jean thing, I think that's an element of that as well, you know. Like where exactly does this sit?
Yeah.
Like it's not quite functioning in any of the ways that it's sort of alluding to. It's just its own thing, and it's quite happy to sort of sit in these many like in betweens, you know.
Also, you mentioned the fact that this was a lockdown record, or one that you listened to a lot on lockdown. Did you find yourself gravitating towards different music or specific music during that period?
You know, I mean, I did, but I think my tastes change all the time. I'm like,
right, yeah.
So I would hesitate to say that particularly it was like due to lockdown or something. It's just you know, if you're living in a particular place or whatever, or you just kind of, I feel like I work in kind of phases. Mm-hmm. So this was like part of that phase, which included the pandemic. Is sort of how I'd describe it. Yeah. But yeah, I was listening to I guess I was listening to quite a lot of stuff which like sounded like it was made at home, or like domestic, like Adam Bowman and stuff like that.
Oh,
and,
cool. Nice.
Just things that made me feel like it was possible to actually make some like seriously good stuff. Just like within the situation, you know.
Yeah. And on Blue Alibi, a final question: do you have a favourite track on the record?
Probably Waves, or Sticks and Stones. I really like as well. I think for different reasons. Sticks and Stones is like the most kind of built up, and to my mind like the most bizarre one, and Waves is just like very pure, and you can listen to it again and again.
Nice.
I think Sticks and Stones has something like you were talking about with the random "but" at the end of the track.
Yeah.
Where it's like just a random like shreddy guitar solo at the end for about 2 seconds or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a real pleasure just to hear you do that. It's much better than my rendition of that.
No, never. No, I'm gonna record a cover album of just you doing that bit. Yeah.
I really went for it. One more question for you, Laurie, is about how music tends to come into your life now, what presence it holds within your life. So how do you tend to buy music or consume music and listen to it as well? Like, where does it fit in?
Since moving out to the peaks, like I've been listening to like pretty much only CDs, which is like everything I was doing was coming out on CD, and it was like way more affordable and stuff. So I'd just like sit in the evenings and like listen to CDs, and that's been my like recent phase. But then obviously I think there's the other side of stuff, which is just like listening to what friends are making and kind of like hearing files going round and all that sort of stuff. But if I was to actually like buy a physical thing, and often, to be honest, like if I was going to listen to something multiple times, like over a period of months, it would at the moment it would be like getting a CD, and just like sitting at home with it, turning off like just because it's like you can. It's kind of like the vinyl thing of like you don't have to have your computer on, you don't have to have all that stuff going, so your part of your brain wakes up and listens. But it's just a bit, for me, like at the moment it's a bit less kind of fetishized. It just like does the job a bit and it sounds good. So yeah, in terms of format, like that's the way. But otherwise I try to keep up with like what's coming out, and I listen quite a lot to like mixes and radio stuff, and then I'll like follow a random path from there and try and find a new label and get something. And there's so much going on nowadays that you can just find anything, can't you?
That is true. Okay, one thing that you found like recently that's exciting you at the moment, can you pluck one out?
You know, one of the ones that was almost on this list that I think is an amazing record that came out last year was Downturn Fantasies by Neil Luck.
Okay.
And it came out on Tract, which is where the first CD of mine came out. And so I kind of wanted to give that a shout out because it's like an amazing label that ran for like 20 years and it's just kind of stopped now.
Right.
But they put out like, you know, I think I'm number like 457 or something.
Holy moly.
It's like absolutely wild, run by this guy Alon, like just on his own. So I just think that label was, you know, I often like, I quite like following labels as someone who kind of ran one, and I think that's like an important thing to find music nowadays. It's like someone you trust to like deliver you music, which is kind of like a label. Yes. But that Neil Luck album is amazing. It's really involving, kind of dramatic, slightly creepy, I don't know, submerged ensemble music meets like weird, like dream dialogue thing going on. It's amazing. So I recommend that.
Nice. Okay, awesome. All right, Laurie, well, thank you so much. This has been wicked.
I've loved
talking about your 3 records, about these 3 records, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, Jack.
And everyone listening, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.